Okay, and we are live.
Sorry about that. So I'm going to take a different approach. I'm not going to appeal to space agencies or photographers or any kind of, modern tricks. I'm just going to say that it is possible to know, and it was known for thousands of years, that the Earth is
Mhm,
round before
mhm,
the invention of the camera,
mhm,
before the invention of the telescope, before the invention of the periscope. It was known. And all modern flat earthers owe their movement to zetetic astronomy, which was a book that was published in the 19th century.
mhm,
And the spherical figure of the Earth, while it did exist or while the flat Earth did exist in antiquity, the spherical figure of the Earth, when it was discovered in the 5th century, was pretty much undisputed until Robotham in 1865. Now, that doesn't mean he's wrong, of course, but that is just something to be aware of. And modern works on this topic, which I've read quite a lot of them, they all trace their text and a lot of their ideas back to the original, which was zetetic astronomy, which zetetic is kind of a strange word. All it means is astronomy based on your observations. That's how Robotham describes it. So I'm just going to show a few images here. This is Earth from
sure.
the Moon, drawn in 1944 by a
Mhm,
victim of the Holocaust,
mhm,
Peter Gins. So a lot of the questions that you see in these old drawings of the Earth from the moon or from space that people imagined is they didn't know what the clouds would look like. So this is, I'm probably going to butcher this name, Camille Flammarion in 1884. And right before the first space probe made the first image of the Earth, allegedly. So this is the last one where we could say, okay, this was 100% their imagination, was this cover of National Geographic in 1956. So you can see that already people knew enough about science before those probes went up that we have images of the Earth like this. And
mhm,
I think we don't need anything but what we can do here on the ground to know that the Earth is round. Uh, so, as such, the flat Earth of memes of today come from the past
mhm,
because they're all based on that original work. So I'm just going to show this example here. And if you understand how I walk through debunking this example, you'll understand how you can debunk 90% of the flat earth memes that are out on the internet. Because most of them, they have this kind of premise. They say, you can see this landmark from this distance, and you should not be able to. It should be obscured. That's what most of the memes are. I would say over half are like that. So you can see I found this one online. I've seen it in quite a few videos that Oahu is visible from Kauai Airport, which is 90 miles away. Uh, and they say that spherical trigonometry of a sphere, they repeat that sphere, is a 5,402-foot drop. So they use Google here to try to seem authoritative. But if you notice, The only thing they quote here is the distance, which is around 90 miles, and the elevation.
Mhm.
So the thing that they're not quoting is where this equation is coming from. So how they get the 5,402 is from Rowbotham's map, which is still accepted widely in flat Earth circles today. I think almost every flat earther, I don't want to say every flat earther accepts this, that in this round Earth model, for every mile squared, you should expect 8 inches of drop off.
Do you think that equation's wrong?
I do think it's wrong. This is my main argument. If you can understand the argument I'm making here, I feel like I've destroyed most of the things around this topic. So I'm just quoting the original here, which
I have this book.
Yes, that is on page 7. If the Earth is a globe, he writes, and 25,000 miles in circumference, the surface of all standing water must have a certain degree of convexity. Every part must be an arc of a circle, which I agree, curvating from the summit at the rate of 8 inches per mile, multiplied by the square of the distance, which I do not agree with. Now, he goes on in that text to say that he got it from an article in a 19th century Encyclopedia Britannica. So I did research on this topic, and what I found is that the equation he's using actually calculates out to a parabola. So in the 19th century, before calculators, calculating this kind of equation right here, where you have all these square roots and squares. So I just want to say I have a little rendering error. You see R3 at the end. The 3 is a footnote pointing to the bottom. That's not R cubed. That's just an R. The footnote looks very similar. So anyway, this is the actual equation, and there's a full derivation and tons of math on the page that I put down there in the footnote. And using this formula, the real expected drop is 25% of the drop that is reported here. So he reports 5,402. But if you use this, and if you put this into Wolfram Alpha, you'll actually see it's like a cone. So it's much more accurate than just taking a parabola, because a parabola continues on forever, and it will never curve back in on itself. So a parabolic arc is never going to be a circular arc. It will approximate a circular arc for a small cross-section of the parabola around 0. You can see it approximates that circular arc, because for civil engineering purposes, that is all you really needed. I saw a table, and I could pull that up in our rebuttal section, where it actually shows the error as you get larger and larger. But I feel like it's easy to see from this image also, that as you increase, the error gets more and more and more. So because it's just a fact of mathematics that a parabolic arc is not a circle. So
I mean, that could be the case. I mean, I could see that formula perhaps being wrong. I've never done the math myself, but I mean, yeah, it's worth looking into. But
yeah,
you know, I'm not totally convinced that all of that would. There may be a problem with that equation. I could see that.
I understand that, because a lot of flat earthers believe conflicting things also. So I'm just trying to attack what I think is a big part of the core of what I've seen argued a lot. But yeah, I definitely encourage you to look into this formula. I would.
Sure. So I've seen, there have been a lot of arguments talking about long distance photography. From France to Spain, they're taking pictures from one mountainside to another from 200 miles away. And they're like, whoa, 200 miles away. This is way too far. There's no way I should be able to see this. And, I'm sure you've heard all the other examples where they're talking about
8 inches per mile squared that I want to mention is the 8 inches per mile squared is it calculates drop for that small area right around 0. So if you're standing up, you are already increasing your height beyond what that should be. That is not a formula for anything but the height right at the ground. So if you lay down on the ground and you close your eye, that would be it. But most people, when they're making these, they're actually holding their camera 6 feet above. And just so you know how nerdy I am about this topic, I actually have the favorite camera of the flat Earth movement, a Nikon P900.
Got the Nikon. I almost bought one.
I actually bought one just to.
Have you zoomed in on the stars?
Yes, I have. I've done some of the. You have to do some adjustments in the camera to get it to stop focusing. I've some videos about it, but so here's something I'm almost done. There's only a few slides left. So these are the favorite stars of the flat Earth movement, because this is what you can see from North America. But I actually live closer to the equator, so this is not what I see. So in North America, if you look up, you can see, oh, there's Polaris right in the middle. It's just like the flat Earth model. But actually towards the equator, and there are tons of images like this, you see something more like this. So you see them turning against each other. So this is completely... I
mean, that's what we should see if it's truly a bipolar system, right?
Right.
We have a true South Pole.
This is what
that's actually something I've wondered about a lot. So, like, what do we have a photo like that for the South Pole? Do we have 24 hours of daylight? Some kind of video we could independently verify from the South Pole. I mean, if we did, that would be a checkmate.
Sure.
But, of course, it's very difficult to go there.
Tons of these around the equator. And if you're interested, I'd encourage you to just look up Star Trails Equator. You can see there's 24-hour videos. You can see the star trails going around. What they do is they increase the exposure, so you can get the trails going like that. And that's
actually a good point. I've never heard of the star trails at the equator. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I've actually done my research on this, so I'm glad you would talk to me about it, because so this is another thing I came up with. Tom was actually with me when I did this. I've been into this for like over a year, just studying both sides. So we were on a plane. This is not my photo, but mine is very similar. I just could not find it on the show.
Oh man, look how flat that is.
Yeah, at 35,000 feet, you should not be able to see the curve. What I'm pointing at.
When do you see it, Fredrick? I want to know. When do you see it?
That's
the problem. I think that's what gets a lot of people. When do you start seeing that curve? When does the horizon drop? And I think that.
So here's what I've read. That's a great question. Here's what I've read. So if there are clouds in the sky, it is very difficult to see at 35,000 feet. If it is a clear day and you have the right camera equipment, you should be able to see, I believe it was around 1 degree of curvature at 35,000 feet. Now, my eyes are pretty crappy. I can show you the calculator thing where you can actually increase the feet and you can see what the curvature should be on a perfectly cloudless sky. But when you have all these clouds in the sky, it gets really confusing where the actual horizon is, especially at that height, and with all the other contrails that are in the air. So
have you heard about the Concorde?
The Concorde?
So the commercial aircraft, they wanted to fly at like 65,000 feet and save gas. And then they junked the program because I don't know why. Of course, every flat earthers are like, oh, checkmate, 70,000 feet. They didn't want you flying that high because it was starting to become too obvious. There's no curve even at 70 or 65,000 feet. That's just one thing I've always looked at and thought that was a little odd.
So
high altitude flight in general, just like the military, it's a very closely guarded secret related to the Cold War and the space race and all this stuff.
Yeah, sure. So here's what I'd say to that about the Concorde program, because I do know some about it. I've never really thought about it in conjunction with the flat Earth, but it is pretty interesting because you're right. It did go above the 35,000 feet, and it probably would have been easy to see the curve. But
it's like, why are they so obsessed with staying relatively low, right? We're only talking like 6 or maybe 7 miles up. You know what I mean?
I totally get it, but I don't really know that they're obsessed. I would say that there were flights on the Concorde, lots of them. They ended in 2004. So by 2004, if you had gone up in that Concorde airplane, you could have taken a photo and said,
oh, we missed our chance.
Yes, it ended in 2000. So the Concorde program ended in 2004. But
we can always join the Air Force.
I'm sure that
join the super secret programs that fly at high altitudes. And
I'm sure that somebody must have pointed their camera out the window and taken a photo, and that's a great line of inquiry to try to find some of those old Concorde archival photos, because a lot of people did take that flight, allegedly, if you believe newspapers, because I believe it was in operation in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and up until 2004 is when I know it ended.
And do you think the images on Google Earth are from satellites? Or do you think they're lying about satellites? Do you think they're telling us the whole truth about satellites, or do you think they're kind of lying a little bit, or do you buy the whole thing about satellites in general?
So, yeah, and I know that satellites is one of the things that you're really focused on because it's what your comment about satellites and the cell phone towers and stuff. Remember, I read that, and that's why I originally
Right.
contacted you. So I did do a little bit of research about the satellites. It's funny because a week before we got all this together, one of the big flat Earth YouTubers did his experiment where he pointed his P900 at the moon, and he saw a lunar transit of the International Space Station. So that would lead me to believe that yes, we are being told the full truth about satellites because even Jeranism, who is a flat Earth YouTuber with tons of
Yeah.
tons of
I think I saw that, and I was like,
tons of reasons to lie to because
I'm still looking for that ISS. I haven't seen it.
his channel. I do believe that there is a transit, unless you think he's a shield. Also, it could be, but that leads me to believe that he's correct.
I have
And
never seen it personally.
this is my last slide. See,
Okay.
after that, I just have my further reading, and then I'll let you talk as long as you want. So, gravity is not just density. So, a lot of the flat Earth YouTubers, especially Eric Dubay, he attacks the Flat Earth Society for saying, that the Earth is constantly accelerating up because he thinks it makes flat Earthers look dumb. I'm sure you've heard a lot of people criticize the Flat Earth Society. Or the
Right, yeah.
Yes, you have. Okay. And criticize its origins, criticize things like that.
It's controlled up. Probably controlled
Right,
opposition.
I've heard, yes, exactly. It's controlled opposition. I've heard that a lot. So I actually think that their position makes more sense, and it's probably a little bit easier to defend because the only thing that you need to invalidate to defend their position is that there is no maximum speed, right? Because if you can just constantly accelerate upwards at the gravitational constant, then the only thing that has to be wrong is the theory of relativity. Like there is no maximum speed of the universe. You can continuously accelerate because if gravity is just density, the big problem that I've never heard a flat earther answer, and I would love to hear you try, is why is the direction of motion down? So if I drop something, why doesn't it fall up, right? Why doesn't the direction...
Well, okay, my best understanding of that, and my understanding is molecular density at the micro level, right? So for whatever reasons, bigger molecules just sort themselves in a density column. This is my personal, maybe it's not perfect, but my understanding is, and it makes sense to me because it seems to work out that way in what I observe in reality, right? So, for example, helium, we all know, is a very tiny molecule.
Sure.
And that goes up like a helium balloon goes up in the sky, right? So it's just sorting itself out. Just like you throw something dense into the water, it's going to go down, right?
So my question is more fundamental, which is really to do with the direction of motion. Let's say that gravity is just density. So why do the lightest go to the top? Why don't the lightest go to the bottom and the heaviest go to the top?
I mean, yeah, that's a really fundamental question. Why down? Because, I mean, I don't know. Why does 2 equal 2? I don't know. It's just such a fundamental...
It makes sense because everything is attracted towards the center, you see.
I think it's just one of those fundamental rules that we just have to kind of accept because we observe it everywhere. And we don't really see anything that violates that rule in nature.
We do, though. We see the moons of Saturn, which you can see from, I think you can even see them from P900, but I'm sure you can see...
Can we use examples on Earth that are more easily verified and validated without relying on authority figures? You know what I mean? On Earth, I mean,
you don't have to rely on authority figures to look at the moons of Saturn because... Hold on. If you don't mind, I'll exit out of this and I can...
yeah, that's fine.
I've seen the moons of Saturn through... I didn't include it, but it's through an amateur telescope.
Saturn is very interesting because you can actually see a shape where it's actually... I haven't done it myself, so I've only seen video or pictures, but it actually does have like a ring around it.
Yes, it does.
It's very different from all the other celestial objects.
Yeah, I've looked at it through the P900 camera, and I did see the ring also. And if you have a better amateur telescope, you can actually see the moons going around it if you look at it every night and you can plot their courses. That's actually how it was discovered originally because the moons of Saturn and Saturn itself is so large that you can actually see the moons orbiting around Saturn without any authority figures, just with an amateur telescope in your backyard.
Mm-hmm. What do you use for a telescope?
I don't own an amateur telescope other than the P900, which is pretty close to a telescope.
So you use that, and that works pretty well?
Yes, I can see the shape of Saturn, but I've only ever seen the moons in photos taken by amateur astronomers. I haven't done it myself.
Oh, you have seen Saturn.
Myself. I can't wait till here's something we can probably agree on. I can't wait until the new P900 comes out. The P1000, it's coming out, I think, next year.
Do you think the government cares about how strong these publicly available cameras are? Like how strong the zoom is? Do you think they care about that?
I don't think so, because how these new cameras work, the P900 camera, it's what's called an ultra super zoom. So the sensor is really small. The photos you take on it have a low megapixel compared to other cameras of that size and weight. So how it works is it can be so lightweight because the sensor is so small. So as sensors keep getting smaller and smaller, we're going to find out real quick if they care, because it's going to be possible to make bigger and bigger zoom lengths. And they're already thinking of, I believe, increasing the P900 zoom by 30 or 40%. I can't exactly remember I read a rumor that said it was going to be over. And these are just some of the resources I use. I just want to preface them by saying that some of the people that are writing these are, really rude, and I would not take their tack or their approach to calling people dumb. But a lot of the math I was able to verify from there, and yeah. So
you're not going to pull a Pastor Anderson on me today?
No, I'm not. I am absolutely not going to pull a Pastor Anderson. So that's it. That is mine, and if you want to just...
Okay, cool. Well, I think what I'll do is I'll just kind of explain how I went, hopefully the short version of how I went from an atheist to believing in everything in this book. And Flat Earth was a big part of that, because, a lot of Christians, it's interesting, a lot of Christians believe in the literal creation. They believe in 6,000-year-old young Earth, right?
Right.
A lot of them believe in creationism, so they don't believe in evolution, macro evolution. But when it comes to flat Earth, I feel like they deny that, and that's crazy. But in my mind, I feel like those are the holy trinity of atheism. When you have creationism, evolution, and heliocentrism. In my opinion, those are the holy trinity of atheism, and basically undermining the authority of the King James Bible.
So, what I would say to that is, and it's a really good point, but what I would say to that is, people have found for hundreds of years a way to interpret the Bible where it doesn't, even fundamentalists, even very strict fundamentalists, like you mentioned, Pastor Anderson, he believes in it. So, and I believe that he's right on, at least according to somebody who holds his beliefs, he is extremely fundamental, and I don't see that it's much of a problem. Like I've seen a lot of you notice I didn't quote the Bible in the presentation or anything like that, as I wanted to make. Just broadly, I could have, but I just wanted to make it.
I'm just kidding, Fredrick. I'm sure it would have worked.
Even to non-Christians, because a lot of the words that, like the circle of the earth, for example, I can see how it could be both ways. And I read this article, which I did not, but I could find it again, where it was arguing about, the meaning of the Hebrew word. I have no idea. Yeah, and Hug, Khug. I don't know how else to say that, but I could definitely, I've seen people interpret it both ways, and I don't feel like the Bible necessarily has to be a history or a science textbook. I feel like it can have metaphors, and that's quite all right.
So you think perhaps in many cases it's being more figurative?
Sure, yeah. Like especially the verse about the grasshoppers spreading out the tent. I definitely
Right, because it's always funny because they always mention Isaiah 40:22, but in that same verse it says he spreads out the heavens like a tent over the earth. So it's like I feel like that's a bad verse to reference. But that's off reference.
Yeah.
But
here the Andersonites mention the beginning of they only like the end. So
yeah, they mentioned that first part. Continuing. For a long time, of course, I was just like literally one of these people that read Dawkins. When Dawkins, this new atheism came around 2006. I was all about it. I was in the Air Force at the time.
I should ask how old you are.
Yeah, I'm 39.
Okay, I'm 24. So I was younger during when all this stuff was coming out, and it definitely affected my life. But go ahead, continue.
Right. So that was like a big trend for a period of time. And I felt like the media was really pushing that in terms of like marketing and branding, like, there are four horsemen of atheism, and we're going to completely undermine Western civilization now. So it was Dawkins and Hitchens and Sam Harris and the other guy, Bennett, I think his name was. And I read their books. I thought these guys are on target, smart guys. They are smart guys. I don't think they're dumb at all. Just because you disagree with someone doesn't automatically make them stupid. A lot of people forget that. It's just that God makes us all very different. We're all uniquely created. Our brains understand, interpret, and process information a lot differently because we're all uniquely created. Because God loves us and He wants to make us interesting and different. Sure. So, I read The Selfish Gene and all these books. But as time went by, I started to notice they were really hypocritical about certain aspects of science. And there were certain parts of science that they would deny. So I started to doubt that more and more. And I saw that how there was this war on Christianity, even within, so-called Christian nations. Chick-fil-A was like this horrible place to eat. Tim Tebow was this reviled figure in the NFL, and he's getting, all of this criticism, and they practically ran the guy out of the league. I thought he was really good. He won that playoff game against the Steelers, personally. But anyway, so more and more, and even as a kid, I always was really interested in astronomy. I mean, it's so cool, right? Like the stars, the sun, the moon. I don't know how people aren't amazed by what a perfect timepiece the sun, moon, and the stars are. Like, it's like God's clock, right? Like they're never wrong. It's so amazing. The moon is always facing us. I mean, how crazy is that? What are the odds?
I don't know. I've actually tried to research what the odds of that are, because if you think about it, it is really amazing.
Over eternity, the moon always faces us, never. And they have this explanation.
One revolution per month, and it's exactly one revolution per day, which is exactly the same as our circadian rhythm. And
it's sidereal locking, and the locks with the tides. It never made sense to me. I'm like, dude, that's too crazy. It would we're both programmers. We know how difficult it is to get timing just right. You're off a little bit, and it's going to get off. Okay, it's going to increase and compound over time, right?
Of course, I haven't really done research on according to space agencies, the other planets and sidereal locking and all that. But I definitely agree with you that it is very. The Earth is at least very perfect for us.
It's very magical, is it not? It's crazy. They can predict all of the eclipses and all of this stuff, and the moon was always a big one. I remember in college, I was looking at, we studied the moon, and we did all this conventional astronomical, stuff you learn in college. And at that time, I believed all this stuff. I did believe all that. And we had to talk about explain the origins of the moon. And of course, everyone in there, I think maybe there was one Christian guy in there. And, I'm feeling bad for him. Oh, this poor Christian, he'll figure it out someday. But, they have all these theories maybe it was captured. Maybe the moon flew in and the Earth just captured it and then magically started rotating around it.
Yeah, I remember I had to learn this stuff in science class. And I don't want to say I'm on it, but I kind of remember the photos where it's like the two big bodies making an impact. You know what I mean? And then one of them,
just smashed into it, and
yeah,
then a piece
yeah,
flew out, and
right,
then it
like
just
huge
was magma
asteroid to
formed.
Earth, and the moon is what's left of the asteroid. That's what we learned in school.
And what's weird is it's so different from the Earth, right? Like let's like I don't believe you can land on it, but according to heliocentric theory, it's something you can land on, right? It's just like Earth. It's a celestial body that orbits and spins just like us, right? So we are so one of the theories is it spun off from the Earth either via impact, or it just spun off at some point for when it was in a magma molten state millions and billions of years ago. And but there were a lot of problems with that theory too. It's like, well, yeah, I don't know. That doesn't really make sense. It doesn't look the same. It's a lot different in composition. I don't know how they know the composition of the moon, but somehow they know.
Well, and from the space rocks brought back.
Yeah.
Actually,
come on, Fredrick.
I kind of question the moon landing? I don't want to put myself totally on that side.
How do you feel about the moon landing? Just real quick.
So, I in general, tend to think it happened. I do agree there are a lot of problems with it, which is why I didn't bring it up. Because I do definitely agree that, for me, the biggest problems are the space rocks that went missing and all the tapes that went missing.
Yeah, all the data, we can't go back and verify that anymore, and they just lost it. And,
yeah, I can sort of see their point that, it was just really a project to try to show American greatness over the Soviet Union, and that the data was not the main thing. It was all about showing the superiority of the Western world, alleged.
Yeah.
I can kind of see that side of it. So I don't want to say that I'm totally think the moon landing is a hoax. I'm not totally sold on it, but sure. I have done research on it, and I've seen,
there's problems,
explanations, and there are some really big problems, but there are also some very small problems that are overblown.
Sure. Yeah, I felt like, I could perhaps see the interpretation that they're faking some parts because they don't want to tell the full truth because it's so secretive. I think the space agencies of the United States are probably the most secretive of all. Above it, perhaps anything else. That and the nuclear program, because nukes are fake too. But
are nukes fake? I have not heard this one before. You think nukes are fake?
Absolutely. It's all. I don't want to get us on a rabbit trail, but that's all fake to justify the abolishment of nationalism, because we need a big daddy government to make sure, because it's too dangerous. The North Koreans have nukes, so it's too dangerous. We have to have the UN swing in, and that's all fake. You can research, look into that separately and see what you think.
I've actually never heard of the nukes are fake thing. So, but of course, once you start falling into the Earth, the shape of the Earth is fake.
I tell you what, go look at early nuke footage. What Hollywood was putting out, where it shows the buses blowing over, but the camera's perfectly still,
and the house is blowing over, right?
Right, all that stuff, but the camera's not moving. How did that? The camera's not moving. What's up with that? But it's really primitive Hollywood, special effects. If you look at the old ones, they're horrible. Anyway, back to the back on the flat.
I'm very sorry. I've never heard anybody say that before, so
that'll be part 2. Anyway, one thing I do want to mention: the Catholic Church, did they not persecute people who were promoting round heliocentrism? So, are you familiar with that history?
Yes, I am familiar with this.
They taught this heavily in my schools.
I feel like from my research that's kind of propaganda. So the Catholic Church, they did persecute people who are saying that. So for the Catholic Church, what was more important was not really the shape of the Earth, it was the position of the Earth. So which is central? Is
helio versus geo.
Right.
Can you really untangle those, though? Outer space and heliocentrism, don't they go hand in hand?
I don't think it really matters which one is central, because they both require each other. If you took the Earth out of the equation, then all of the other orbits of the planets would be messed up. Yeah. So it just matters your point of reference. You know what I mean? If you think about a 3D modeling software, which one are you focused on? Is it the Earth or the Sun? So yeah, the Catholic Church, what they were really worried about was people saying that the sun was the center, not the earth. I don't think they cared too much about the shapes. Don't really, I don't, I looked at some of the documents and I couldn't find, but I would love to be proved wrong because, I'm not exactly a fan of the Catholic Church, but
Yeah.
I could not find anything that really showed that they were arguing for a flat earth. I just saw that they were arguing for a geocentric model.
Geocentric.
Right.
So anyhow, eventually I stumbled upon all of this space race stuff after World War II. And actually, I think even before that, I should probably mention that the book of Revelation was a big impact on me. Because I think everyone has kind of heard of the mark of the beast and how that plays into end times and how basically there's going to be a great tribulation period where Christians are going to be persecuted. And I felt like that was really starting to lock into what I was seeing in my experience more and more.
Yeah.
I was starting when the Bible talks about the man will be numbered by his name, basically talking about a database system, right? Like everyone's going to have a number associated with their name. Like how did the Bible know about?
Yeah, this is funny. A lot of Christians or even just people think I'm crazy when I say my favorite book of the Bible is Revelation, because most people
absolutely.
Like, oh yeah, my favorite book's John or Mark, or Acts of the Apostles. But no, I feel like Revelation is definitely
I
what
agree.
good stuff is.
I agree. Yeah, Revelation is amazing, and how that fits in, especially with Revelation 13, where it talks about the Antichrist who's going to come to power. He's going to consolidate all nations under his power, and he's going to force everyone to believe him, and the believers will take their mark, right?
Sure.
So, and we've seen that in Christianity. We've seen that in every, just everywhere. Like,
we're going to talk about crazy theories because you've already said nukes are fake. One of the things I've thought about in relation to this verse is that perhaps the Antichrist is an artificial intelligence, and the mark that people are receiving is so that they can commune with that artificial intelligence.
That's a possibility, but I think I've seen some scriptures. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I do believe it will be a living person. I have wondered about the AI robot theory.
Yeah, because it could start as a living person, but
I believe
today are trying to replace bits of their body bit by bit. Like
I do think it could perhaps be a transhumanist thing where it's like someone with implants or some kind of enhancements, perhaps, or like some kind of neural kinetic.
The transhumanist dream is actually to replace their brain one neuron at a time, so that there's no change in consciousness. You know what I mean? Like
right. Yep.
Yeah. Some of them, of course, they see different ways to get there, but like, for example, killing the body and uploading the mind to a computer. But the problem is that causes a philosophical problem where there's a change in consciousness, like where the consciousness in the original body dies and then it is quote unquote reborn in the computer. So a lot of them, what their ideal is to replace the brain one neuron at a time, because they believe that it's like the ship of Theseus. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think even Pastor Anderson has talked about this, where like even if you took every aspect of your being, your physical being, and copied that, it still wouldn't be you. It would just be a copy of you, because there's a spiritual element to man. I believe we both believe that.
Absolutely.
There's a part that you cannot copy, like even if with all the best technology in the world.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Because see, here's the thing. I believe that we're very soon, like a lot of people have said in the past, oh, we're never going to know for sure if there's a God or not. I think if this kind of life extension forever is allowed to happen, there almost assuredly is not a God.
Exactly. Actually, I believe that's part of the rebellion against God.
Right. Yes.
Because you'll notice that everything that Satanists or people who are against God, they always want to invert the Bible. Like if you look at the creation story, I'm sure you may have seen lists where it talks about how everything's inverted in what they teach, and that's true. If you look at what they teach the reptiles come before the humans and all this stuff. They teach this the sun comes first and then the earth, but it's in the opposite in the Bible.
And I think the easiest way to prove this is just to ask people. So what makes people born during 2100 more morally valuable than people born during 1900? Like, why did everyone born in 1900, if there's a just sovereign God, have to have the punishment of death? But let's say that, in a hypothetical world, which I don't believe is possible, this transhumanist revolution occurs in the year 21 or 2200, and then everybody after that point lives forever in a computerized, their own creation.
Right.
So if that were to happen, you could be pretty sure that there is no God, right? Because
I would agree, and that's exactly why it won't happen. It never will. In fact, I think if they came up with technology to live forever, I believe at that instant God would come back, because he would not allow it. Jesus would come back at that very moment,
right,
because it would
like,
totally break everything.
Or it would be like, is it Genesis 3 or 11? The Tower of Babel?
Right.
Yeah. So, like, a lot of, I think if that was allowed to happen, there's just no way that there could actually be like a God. It just doesn't make sense, because it says that people born after a certain point are more valuable than those before. Because there's yeah.
It says in the Bible that every man is appointed to die once. So that would make the Bible a liar.
Right.
So it simply isn't going to happen. And I have strongly believed
I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but there's these transhumanist Mormon associations where they've like putting like, and I don't understand how you can reconcile this transhumanism with religion. I know we're getting really off topic, but I think it really shows that even though we don't agree on the shape of the earth, we can still be friendly and like have a lot of a broad.
I think we agree on a very high percentage of things. Just one issue, but that doesn't mean we're insane or anything, or I'm insane. But anyway, so perhaps we should get back. So if you look at the history of the space race, okay, I believe that is all a giant metaphor. Like when they talk about atmosphere and they talk about, we were nuking the atmosphere in Operation Fishbowl in order to see, what would happen if we nuked the atmosphere. Have you heard about this deal where the governments of Russia and the United States were trying to nuke the atmosphere, whatever?
Where they were afraid they would set it on fire, right? They would.
So the conventional. This is public history. It's all on Wikipedia and all this stuff. But the story is they were trying to see, what would happen if we nuked the atmosphere. Like, that doesn't even make any sense anyway. It's just like really thin air up there. So like, what's the point? Why are you trying to nuke like thin air particles in outer space? It doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, I'm gonna say I don't really know a whole ton about Operation Fishbowl, but I think that
it's pretty interesting. I mean, they called it Fishbowl, right? Like, literally, like, it's like, come on, guys. You could come up with like a sneakier name.
Pretty, that name is pretty flat earthy. I can't deny that.
Yeah, so it's an interesting, regardless of what you end up concluding, it's an interesting story that they were even trying to do this in the first place. So I believe they actually physically discovered the firmament a little bit after World War II, probably in the mid or early 1950s. And if you really study the space race, it's really, the whole thing is an allegory or a symbolic story about discovering the firmament and then racing. What they're really racing is to hide all of the evidence of the firmament, because you can actually physically go and find it. If you just get in an airplane and fly south, you're going to find it. I believe that.
What would you say to the idea that, right, it's safety is what I've mostly heard, and it does make sense to me, because if you fly over the South Pole, you have the Pacific and you have just ocean, and it's one of the most remote areas on Earth, because at least in the North Pole there's lots of small towns and small airfields.
Right.
And during World War II and the Cold War, Russia and the United States and Canada built up the North Pole. So it's safer to fly over the North Pole.
And I have a lot of, I don't know, I have theories about the North Pole too. Like, they're super secretive even about that. Like, what's with the whole Santa Claus thing, man? What's up with Santa Claus? What's up with that story?
I don't know.
Why are they making up that story about the North Pole? But even the North Pole, like, I want to visit the North Pole. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Right? I actually think
coincidences exist. Like, why does Santa Claus have to come into this? Can he just be a or no? Is there no such thing as a coincidence in our world?
I know, right? So the whole North Pole thing as well it's really interesting if you compare the North Pole to the South Pole. Like they're really different. Like the North Pole has a lot of different kinds of diverse plant life and animal life. There's just more going on there in general. It's much warmer in the North Pole
Yeah.
compared to the South Pole. The South Pole, and they have
And it's supposedly getting warmer every year in the North Pole.
So they say, and they say everything's getting warmer. Depends what decade you ask them. So, I mean, they're saying it was getting colder.
I know this is our topic, but I actually do subscribe to that whole global warming thing. So I actually do believe it's probably true because I've seen the shipping routes. You can see the maps where they're shipping things over the North Pole more and more. And Canada and Russia right now in the UN are fighting over, because that whole area used to just be a tundra, but now the ships are passing more and more. So, I know we're not talking
it's a complex topic,
but
I think that actually plays into end times as well. And I think when we start talking about global warming and all of that, I think that actually kind of plays into end times eschatology. That's kind of a complex issue, but
yeah, it is interesting because
it's like end times. It's like end times for atheism, right?
Right. Exactly. Yes, it's end times for atheists because.
And the reason that they had that's their end times for atheism is because it goes against the Bible. So the Bible says, what happens when he gets off the ark? God tells Noah, hey, I promise you and all of humanity, I'm never going to flood the earth again. So what do they tell us? They tell us, hey, they're going to flood the earth again.
Well, even if all of the ice caps melted, the whole earth wouldn't flood as described in the Old Testament.
What are you talking about, Fredrick? Have you seen Waterworld? That movie was real, brother.
I have not seen it, so can't comment.
Waterworld. There was just water everywhere. That's like a documentary to them, okay? That's like their religious movie.
So
yeah, Waterworld, it was just all water.
I've seen maps where they melt.
With Kevin Costner.
I've seen maps where they melt both ice caps, and you can see there's still some earth left. It's not everything.
Yeah. Oh, man. So anyhow, so they were nuking the firmament, right? Or nuking the atmosphere. And basically, I believe once they figured that out, they came up with this Antarctic treaty saying, hey, you can't go south of just all of south of 70 degrees south. Just nobody can go there. These penguins are like so cute. We need to preserve this for science because they're just adorable. Okay. So all of a sudden, and then like all the world was like, yes, we agree. We cannot go there, and we're going to do research on penguins and wildlife. And that's super important for us all to agree on for like 50 plus years because, just preserving that is going to be super important. And that is not consistent with like all of human history where we're just looting, plundering, just going through, fighting over every square inch of land, right?
Sure. So what I might say is I've researched a lot about this Antarctic treaty and stuff like that because it's a big part of flat Earth lore. You kind of need the Antarctic treaty because it's what flat Earthers use to say why we can't have evidence of the firmament, why we can't have evidence of the edge. So the Antarctic treaty is actually really important, and I'm kind of sad I forgot to include it. These last 2 weeks I didn't put it in this presentation, but there are lots of expeditions, and there have been through history before the Antarctic treaty was in place, and also after. You can apply to go there, and there's flights that you
basically get a guided tour.
Yes, that's true. Unless you, of course, were to spend the crazy amount of money it would take to make your own Antarctic expedition.
Right. It's actually super expensive to go there. You need all kinds of environmental organizations to green light it, and it's like a ton of red tape if you actually want to.
Makes sense though, because there's not really, as far as I know, there's not really any natural resources there. Like, why aren't we fighting? Why aren't all the nations fighting over it? But who would want to live there? It's so cold, and it's inhospitable most of the year. All flights are closed half the year.
I mean, it's true.
Except for those few bases. So I don't know why anyone would want to live there. And I'm not, other than fresh water, ice, I don't really know if
There's got to be all
fresh
kinds of
water or is it
to
seawater.
go in and mine there. I mean, mining operations and all that. There's got to be stuff they would like to get to pull out oil.
I feel like, see, I'm not extremely well versed on where oil is and stuff like that.
It's
but
everywhere.
I feel like it would be economically prohibitive to do it in Antarctica, and that's why it didn't happen. And also, if you read the Antarctic Treaty, none of the nations gave up their territorial claims. What they did is during the Cold War, they basically set aside those claims just temporarily. But all of the nations in the Antarctic Treaty do reserve the right to reassert their claim at any time. So I'm not sure if you know that.
Perhaps. I mean, I don't think that's good. I don't think they're going to assert
You don't
anything.
think they ever will, but
No.
they did assert the right to do that in the Antarctic Treaty, all of the nations that are parties to it.
So, yeah, they established that treaty. And then not many years later, they also established the Outer Space Treaty. So not only do we have the sides covered, of course, according to flat earth theory, it's the borders, right? It's the South Pole. It's like a speaker magnet, right? Yes, so that's the negative is supposed to be the South Pole. And so that, they had the Antarctic Treaty, and then going up, they now have the Outer Space Treaty is what they call it. And it has all of these rules, and basically it's really similar to the Antarctic Treaty, basically saying, hey, you can't try to militarize space and all of this different stuff. It's just going to be this place for scientific, research, and, we're going to sing Kumbaya, and it's going to be like Star Trek, and everything's going to be, and basically we don't want people going out there and doing things, shooting space junk out there or whatever.
Yeah, but I mean, so their theory for why you can't just go into space if you want to is because it could create a cascading space junk, right? Where if you shoot one thing wrong, it could hit another satellite, and that could create a cascade of space junk, which would make it impossible to launch any missions. So I do kind of understand why they believe that. Don't you?
Sure. I mean, I could see it's plausible. It's not consistent with all of human history where we're just fighting over everything. It's just all of a sudden they're just super, teaming up with the Soviets during the midst of the most heated time of the Cold War, and just suddenly agreeing on certain things. It just doesn't seem very plausible to me, at least for me personally. Anyway, so going beyond the whole space race issue, there's just certain aspects of the flat Earth that just are very compelling to me. One of them, of course, is where's the curve, and then why is it that NASA gives us all these images that are inconsistent with what independent people, what their findings are. So, for example, NASA will give us a photo from 100,000 feet, or even the military, right? Like military photography will put out images from 100,000 feet where there's this giant curve, and they're like, oh, look, you can see the curve. And then, an independent balloon will go up and it'll be like perfectly flat. The horizon's at the same level it always is. And then someone's like, well, that's a little suspicious. Why, if it's just naturally there and clearly observable, and, there's what's with this fakery? The space jump is showing all this curvature out on the exterior camera. And then anytime you have an independent person putting a balloon up, it's totally flat. And so it's just very strange that it would be that inconsistent in that regard. Like, where's the curve? Like, how high do I have to go to see this curve?
So one thing I wanted to ask you, so this map is a bit of a joke, but I made it a few months ago. As you know, somebody previously canceled on this debate with me. So I made this just as a little bit of a joke, like I'm calling myself a doctor, because the guy who I canceled, he calls himself a doctor, but he's not.
Okay.
So, but I just wanted to kind of ask you what you think about maps, because flat earthers don't always agree about maps. You know what I mean? So
maps are a tough issue. I don't think anyone can agree on maps. That's a tough one to find an agreement about. Even the round earth people can't agree on a map. Yeah.
So I kind of like mapping software like QGIS. Right. So I made this one in that. and you can see that it keeps the shape of more of the southern continents. You can see. So I was just thinking what you think about this, because in the azimuthal equidistant map, right? The biggest problem is that Australia becomes extremely wide.
Yeah, I've seen that. I have seen that, right.
So on this map, you can see that Australia, the Philippines, where I live, New Zealand, down here, I actually
Looks pretty good.
Yeah. So I was just wondering, like, why do you think that all the maps are wrong? Because this is a big thing for me in the flat Earth. And why could I make this one, using the globe model, make this map that's so much better than the AE map?
That's a great question. I don't know what it is about mapping in general, but it seems like anytime mapping comes up, I mean, I think you may have seen that movie clip, or I think it's a TV show where they're talking about all the different normal, they're just, conventional maps. And they're like, oh, the Mercator and all these different projections.
Yes, there's so
they're like, oh yeah, Africa's this big, and United States is this big, and the lady's like, what is this map? Like, this doesn't look like where we live at all. And then she's like, oh yeah, you've been lied to this whole time. It's actually this big. And it's just like, even from a conventional point of view, it's like we cannot get a very accurate, high fidelity map of what we actually are living on, whatever it may be. So, I mean, to be honest, I think this looks pretty darn good. It looks pretty good to me in terms of like, what if I had to guess?
Let me explain.
But I mean, I don't know. I have no way to verify. I try to only trust the most things that I can independently verify, right? Like, that makes sense. Like, the devil always tries to consolidate power so that he can control more things and deceive more people that way, right?
So let's see if you still like it after I explain how I made it. So the first thing I did, this is called the Pierce-Canuncio projection. Basically what it does is it takes parts of the ocean and it uses the ocean as the part that will absorb the error. So that's why a lot of the shapes and relative sizes of the continents look correct. But this distance here is extremely exaggerated. But all of the shapes of the continents are right. Like, interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of like a hybrid. Would that be
right? And then what I did, because in this map, Antarctica would be right about here in its normal non-flat Earth shape. So what I did was I just selected that, deleted it. Then I took the outline of Antarctica from the AE map.
And superimpose that, layered that on.
Yes, and then I put the tail of Antarctica from the version of this map and kind of just smushed them together. And you can actually see this sharp edge here where I cut it.
Right.
That would be the tail of the Antarctica on the AE map. So mapping is one of my big sticking points for the flat Earth, because when we use the globe Earth as our in mapping software, in shape files, everything just works and everything makes sense. And I've not seen any flat earther be able to prove from New Zealand that, actually this island in New Zealand is triple the size that we think it is, or
right.
actually double the width. So that's
honestly, I do think that's a tough one to resolve. Like, honestly, I've looked at this whole issue for a long time, and I don't think it's 100% one way or another, because I find it to be some aspects to be really confusing for the flat model, and I find some aspects to be super confusing for the round model.
Okay,
here's a simple example.
Say that, because
here's a simple example that anyone can go out and verify, and you don't need any scientists or anyone to tell you anything. Like, if you go outside, why is it hot when the sun's overhead? It doesn't make any sense. Like, okay, the explanation is, the sun is going through more of the atmosphere, so it gets colder. But I just don't swallow that explanation. Like, it's hotter overhead because it's closer, okay? And when it gets farther away, it becomes more dim, right? You can look right at the sun when it's rising. So clearly the energy of the sun has dissipated over, just that farther distance. Now you can look right at the sun, because the electromagnetic, it has attenuated over distance like every electromagnetic signal does. And now you can look right at it. And it's also much cooler because it doesn't, it's just much farther away than it is overhead. So
you're in the standard flat Earth model where the sun gets closer and farther as the seasons, right?
Right. I believe it's circling.
Right. The sun
Am I
rises and lowers, correct?
right? And it's just a matter of perspective. Like you can only just see so far from the ground. And I
Right.
believe if you went up high enough, you could see the sun again. If you went up high enough, I do believe that.
Oh, I see. So right, because you would have to on the flat Earth for
Yes.
yes.
So here's an example. There's this video called the Go Fast Missile. Perhaps you've seen it. It's this guy Kai Michelson. He launched a missile 71 miles up, and he had 3 cameras on it, and it was super spinning. So it's like kind of hard to watch, but you can see what's going on. And he launches it up from Phoenix, from Arizona. He launches it up from Arizona at a time when the moon is over Australia, and he launches it up. And in the video, you can see the moon. Like it's really small and like really dim, of course, because when you see, even when the moon is on the horizon, it's really dim, right? Because the light has attenuated over distance, or the atmosphere, or whatever people may believe. And it's just like a guy left a comment. He was like, "Is that the moon in the video?" And the guy just responds, "Yes." And I'm like, does this guy realize what he's saying? Like, you're seeing the moon over Australia from Arizona. Like, that doesn't, if that's true, that is insane, right? Like, that's totally crazy if that is true.
Sure. So here's one thing I definitely want to say. A lot of the photographic and video evidence is one of the reasons that I think a lot of people who believe in the round Earth are very misguided to call flat earthers stupid. Because at first glance, and if you just watch it and you watch all of these videos together that are in these like 2-hour long compilations of flat earth, proofs from video, it is extremely compelling. And that's actually why I did so much research into this topic, because I was actually starting to believe it. So that's why I
Truth matters, right?
Right. That's why it does matter. Truth does matter. So that's why I actually started to become something of an expert in what I like to call flat earth apologetics.
Sure.
So, what I would say about most of the video evidence is that I'm willing to accept it, but I need to just, I usually can find some problem, especially if I go on some site like Metabunk and I see Mike West. He will go through, and he's an expert in photography, and he will fix distortion in lenses, and he will show, actually the time is wrong, or actually it flew this way, or he'll pick out.
I think that's very important to take a strong argument from both sides, right?
Right, exactly. So I agree that a lot of the video evidence is extremely compelling. If it wasn't, nobody would believe the flat earth.
Like someone in chat is saying there's clearly a curve from 120,000 feet. Like, but see, a lot of people say stuff like that, but I just feel like that's very disingenuous, because there's a lot of videos where there's none at all.
I absolutely
I
agree.
don't know how they say that.
Because if we're just gonna argue from videos, I've seen videos where it's totally flat. I've seen videos where there's a curve, and I've seen on both sides people say, that's a fisheye lens, either to prove or disprove. Like some people say that the fisheye is making it flat, because it's right at that angle, and then some will say, no, the fisheye is actually making it round. And I feel like my strong suit is map projections, geometry, stuff like that. So that's where I tend to go at it. But I have seen experts in photography look at these videos, and I would encourage anybody who has questions about a certain video or a certain photo to just ask on that Metabunk website, or just to search it. One thing I will say is one thing I do know for sure: when you see videos of the sun getting smaller as it sets, that's lack of a solar filter on the lens. So if you're going to shoot the sun with a camera, you definitely need a solar filter, because the sunlight will overexpose the camera and it will make the sun look way bigger as it is. So
how do you feel? Sorry to interrupt. How do you feel about all of these videos where it shows a really apparent hot light? And I think you have a pretty strong understanding of photography. You know what a hot light is, like a spot, or they call it a hot light, right? Like when you can see a clear. How do you feel about that? How do you interpret that? Like, of course, a flat earther believes, hey, there's a hot light. That means it's close. Like I have these lights in front of me. You can probably see light kind of shining off me a little bit. And you see it in all the NASA photography where you'll see like a spot that the light is close, so that you'll see a part of the light where it's much brighter. And you'll see that a lot in the high altitude balloon footage.
Sure. So what I would say about that is it could be a reflection, because I feel like a lot of the stuff in the atmosphere is probably reflective, especially the clouds. So I have seen those, like they call it the spotlight sun or something like that.
Right.
Call it that. So
more or less. So,
the name of the company that launched the very famous one that a lot of flat earthers use to show the spotlight. And I think it might start with a G, but that's escaping me right now. But sure. I've actually, that spotlight right there, I kind of feel like it's just either a reflection off the ocean or a reflection off the clouds. I don't really feel like it's actually like a spotlight. Like that's, okay. Because if you have a light that's really far away, you can still reflect it off a mirror. You know what I mean?
Sure,
that's
yeah.
why I see it.
So let's get into stars. Stars are a big issue for me. I mean, we've been around on this earth for more than 2 decades. I've been around, 39 years. These constellations are constant for thousands of years at least, right? We can agree on that.
Yes.
And yet we're told that all of creation is predicated on an explosion, right? I don't think you believe that. Do you?
No, I do not.
And even if you did, I'm not saying you're a bad Christian, because some people just think, it's God created that explosion or what have you.
No way that we can know. It's possible that God created it.
I know you've heard of the gap theory, right?
Yes, I've heard of the gap theory. Some people in my church actually believe that. So
yeah, if you don't believe flat Earth, I think that's actually really rational, to be honest.
Yes, so do I. But I feel like I don't want to involve myself in things too high for me, as it says. So those kinds of things, like what happened milliseconds after the Big Bang, or was there a Big Bang, or that kind of stuff is definitely too high for me, and I'm willing to accept that there's no way we can know that kind of thing. And
sure,
who says they know for sure is probably not telling the truth.
Yeah, I don't think you can 100% a lot of this stuff. So the stars were always a big sticking point. The stars are amazing. It's like a part of God's timepiece, right? It's rotating in the sky. Constellations never change, and that just never sat well with me. Even when I believed that stuff, I was like, I believed, these are stars and they're all suns, just like our sun, and it's just flying through space, and we're part of this big cosmic God. Not a God-breathed explosion. I didn't believe that at the time, but I just believed it was part of this giant universe that was created by somebody. And even the fact that the Earth rotates around the sun, Tycho Brahe was famous for arguing that there should be some parallax, because we're talking about 93 million miles around the sun. So that's a difference of 200 million miles almost. And so we should see some kind of parallax. We're talking about objects that are very far and stars that are a little bit closer, but we never see any kind of parallax, not even over thousands of years of time. We should see some kind of shift at some point, because it just always was a very difficult one for me. It just never sat well with me at all.
So I'm going to try to present to you the explanation. I don't know if you'll accept it, because you're right, this is quite a bit of a difficult one. But here's, at least from what I understand. So parallax has been a big problem for astronomy for centuries. You're right, Brahe did not see it, and neither did a lot of the people that came after him before him. And they just didn't understand why they couldn't see some kind of stellar parallax with the model. And basically what it all came down to is that the distances are just so great. And at least this is what is said, and I generally accept it if I don't have some reason not to, that it's kind of like asking, if something is really, really small, does it still exist? Like, do bacteria exist? So the parallax is so extremely small that you need very sensitive instruments to see it. That's what I've always been told. That's what I've found doing research.
Right. We would have to accept that there's such an every single star has such an extraordinary distance that you can't even measure it over thousands of years. And even though the Milky Way galaxy is I think they say it's flying like a 65 million miles per hour through the galaxy. And then
I would definitely agree with you that the distances have to be so great that there would be nothing, because
right, there's
the
just
whole model falls apart. That's absolutely true. And it just,
that's difficult to fathom. I mean, I
yeah,
think
it
you'd
all
have to.
comes down to whether you believe the scientists who have done the extremely precise measurements or not.
See,
Whether,
my problem with that as a Christian, especially, that's a universe that doesn't indicate or convey a lot of intentionality. So that's something that's always bugged me. Like, okay, I have to accept that there's all these other lights in the sky are stars, and that, you know, and that's how they sell this alien thing to us, right? I believe now we can get into aliens because that's super interesting to me, and this all ties together with flat Earth and heliocentrism.
yeah,
Because I actually believe the whole alien thing is going to tie into the end times with Antichrist. And you've seen Independence Day, that movie from 1996. Are you familiar?
I've seen some clips of it.
So the aliens come blow up the White House. That's a pretty famous clip from that movie.
And
basically, the aliens come and humanity unites, and they're fighting the aliens, and they win. And
Yeah.
you know, there's been a few movies like that. I think that is literally going to be part of the end times deception, and I think that's why part of why they're always selling the alien thing through Roswell and all of these different. It seems like, you know, the government's always like pushing this alien stuff, like even History Channel and the ancient aliens. Man, you know, I think aliens did it. I don't believe in aliens at all. We are the apple of God's eye, and we're His perfect, you know, His creation.
I think there's two ways you can look at the alien thing. And I think there's two ways you can look at the big distances thing. You can say that, oh, it doesn't point to a lot of intention, and you can look at it that way. Or you can say that it does point to a lot of intention, because if you actually go back and you research what a lot of these scientists were thinking that they were going to see aliens like very soon. A lot of these guys like Carl Sagan, they had these theories about, you know, there must be so many planets just teeming with life. Why can't we see them? Like the whole universe should be like a type 2 civilization or a type you know what I'm talking about? So
yes,
you can say it doesn't point to a lot of intention, but I would say that actually the fact that this universe is so vast and that for all we know it's all here just for us, it does point to a lot of intention. It points to, you know, because we have the instruments where we should be able to see if there's anything else out there. And the fact that we can't, and the fact that, you know, communist governments, all kinds of governments would really benefit from that if they had proof. They would be shouting it from the rooftops. I think that the vastness of the universe points towards a God and not away from it.
You think God was just showing off?
Yes, and I don't I don't see why.
I mean, maybe. I don't believe it. But.
You don't believe it, but that's just my way of looking at it. That there's no reason he couldn't. You know what I mean? He's great enough to do that. So,
yeah, I think that pretty much covers the star aspect, the sun and moon. I think we've covered the heavens quite a lot.
Sure. What I would say is about the stars. So this photo on my screen of the southern stars is something that I really encourage flat earthers to look at, because you can very clearly see the two poles. And you don't
So hold on a second. Do you know, like, how do we know this isn't, how can we verify that this is not photoshopped or
so what I would say is you could, oops, sorry, I dropped something. You could do it by quantity, because there are just so many of these different, there are
independent photographers kind of thing.
Like you can search for star trails equator, right? And you can see just all of these many independent images, because it's such a great way for amateur photographers to get such a pretty image. And you can see also video after video of the two poles rotating. And you can see even these 360 photos, you know.
I mean, yeah.
So I think this is one of the biggest problems with the flat Earth.
Those are cool photos for sure. But I've heard so much compelling evidence on both sides, so it's super confusing, right? Like I've heard you can see the North Star from like 10 degrees south, and that just makes no sense, right? Have you heard of these sort of claims?
I'm not sure that it makes no sense. You can see it from 10 degrees south. So you're at the equator. And
Allegedly. Now, I haven't verified this. This is
Right,
according
so-
to someone.
Right, but I'm pretty sure Polaris is at a bit of a tilt, so you should be able to see it. But again, this is like a bit outside the realm, but I'm not sure that it doesn't make sense. So, yeah. There's just so many images, so I find it hard to believe that all of these star trails are photoshopped, near the equator. And I was actually thinking of making my own because I live near the equator. So
that would be a good experiment.
Yeah.
Have you heard that the moon has different effect than the sunlight, that it actually cools? And this is something I have been slacking on. I should have been buying. There's a tool you can buy that measures the temperature in the shadow.
Right?
Yeah, the laser thermometer. Check the moonlight is supposed to cool, and then the shadow is supposed to actually be warmer, which is the opposite of the sun. Now I've seen video, and I don't believe anything I see on video. I take it as a data point, but I don't really buy. You have to be careful with video because you can do anything on video these days, right? Like
Right.
the movie Gravity is not real. Like the movie Atmosphere is not real.
Yeah, that's why I definitely like older videos and older photos, because you're right. Today it is easy. Even a child can do like crazy Photoshop stuff that I can't even conceive of. So
Not just Photoshop. I'm talking, like even
Right,
real time video. They can have dead people reanimated talking, and it looks like them. Right? Like I don't even know if Donald Trump was real. Like maybe they killed him, and he's just like, because they have software on Steam called Face Rig.
right.
You can basically you can basically look like a cartoon character talking and uses your eye movements and everything.
State of the art AI stuff where you can actually puppet up the president or Obama.
Right.
Seen
And
some-
that's all publicly available. Imagine what the military has, right?
Yeah,
or
exactly.
NASA.
Yeah.
You have to be so careful because the deception is going to get more. It's going to grow. They're going to deceive us more and more as time goes by. So you have to be super careful about images and video because you can't beat your own independent experience and analysis.
Sure, and from a very paranoid worldview, which I'm not going to say that I necessarily hold, but like I've said in the beginning of my talk with you, I totally understand why some people hold it. Like it totally makes sense to me because there is a lot of deception in the world, and there have been a lot of especially when you see how much the media lies, it can be extremely demoralizing.
It's difficult. There's a lot of filtering. It takes a lot of work to filter all this information, right? Like who's got the time? Especially if you're like married and have kids. Who the heck has time? Or if you're like a guy that works 80 hours a week, I mean, who has time for all this stuff?
Yeah, I know. Imagine you're married with 4 or 5 kids and you're I don't know if you're married or not. And you're just
I'm married, yeah.
Oh, are you? Do you have any kids?
Yeah, I have 3 kids. Yep.
Oh, that's great. So
actually, hold on. Miranda, you want to say hi?
No.
Come here. Come here.
Hello.
Say good morning.
No.
Say good morning.
No.
Say good morning.
good morning.
Say good morning.
No.
Are you gonna be shy?
No.
Hey, Daddy's having a conversation. Can I come play with you in a little bit?
Well, no. I'm like, today I'm going to my,
Your friend's house?
yeah.
Miranda, do you think outer space?
No.
Miranda, do you think outer space is real?
No.
You don't think it's real?
What about dinosaurs?
It's actually
Brainwash
nighttime
them.
here for me.
Get them early.
Yeah, you got them early there.
Friend's house, cause it's Allie's birthday.
Yeah, it is her birthday. Can Daddy have privacy, please? I'll chit chat with you in a little bit, okay? Bye. Thank you.
If you need to go, we can wrap this up.
Nah, she just wanted to come say hi.
Sure, no problem.
Let me ask you a question. Why do you think the sky is blue? I find this to be the most awesome thing to ask. I think it's so super interesting. Do you buy the whole Rayleigh scattering thing?
So what I know is a lot of flat earthers believe that there's waters above the firmament, and that's what makes the sky blue, right? Is that what you hold to?
Some believe that. I personally do not, but go ahead.
Okay, so I've argued with ones who have. So
They're wrong.
They're wrong. Yes, I would definitely agree with that. So, why is the sky blue? I
You
just
think the conventional Rayleigh scattering explanation is
Yeah.
just light, how the light comes in, and only the blue frequencies come through, something like that?
makes sense to me. That's what
So
I thought.
I thought this would be worth bringing up just because I think it's so interesting. I think it's actually because I'm sure you've seen videos. You know how you go up and the sky is blue in the daytime, and as you go high enough, you'll actually see the sky is black. It's black above the blue, right?
Right.
That does happen. So what I believe is going on is that the sky only becomes blue when the sun comes around, right? So the sun is an electromagnetic exciter, right? It excites the particles in the air. And there's a lot of neon gas. There's a lot of noble gases in the air, right? That just float in the air at lower altitudes, right?
Right.
We agree on that. So there's neon gases, and I believe what the sun is doing is actually exciting those particles and basically colorizing the air, which is why we see, the neon gases and argon lit up at lower altitudes. And I believe that's why it's blue, and I believe that's why at the edges it's being excited at a lower level. So you actually see different colors at those edges.
I'll try to give you a more conventional explanation.
Sure.
As we all know, the higher you go, the less the altitude is, or I mean, the less air there is. Like the less oxygen, the less air.
Yeah.
When I was younger, when I was 17, 18, I lived in Atlantic City, which is on right on the ocean, so it's right there at sea level. And then I flew to Bogota, which is like one of the highest cities in the world. And you can definitely feel the difference. I was sick for a few days from altitude sickness. So
I've been to Utah, the mountains.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is, like I said, not an atmospheric scientist, but there's less air up there. It would make sense that it would be darker and there would be less Rayleigh scattering because there would be less particles for the light to bounce off of the higher you get. I mean, so it depends on your vantage point. But if you're right in the middle, like if you're flying in an airplane and you can look down and you can see, you can see the air below you, and then you look up and you can see the thinner air above you. Yeah, it does make sense to me that it would be, more blue below you and more black above you.
Right.
That would be
so
mission.
I've heard some flat earthers say that the moon is translucent. That's another thing I actually don't believe. Have you heard this theory where they think you can see like blue behind the moon?
Yes, I've heard of this theory.
So I don't buy that either. I kind of fell for it for a while, but I actually what you're seeing is you're seeing a layer of blue gas in front of the moon.
Right.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yes, I get it.
So it actually, and that's why the color of the moon, I think you have probably observed this, the color of the moon always looks like the color of the sky, right? Or from your relative direction.
Right.
I guess it'll be like kind of black from when it's at jet black nighttime, but during the day it will look blue, and even the empty part, right? You'll see the blue part through the. Like, how do you see blue sky behind a solid object, right? Like, it can't be the blue light coming from behind the moon because it's a solid object, right? That doesn't make any sense.
Right, that doesn't.
Like, it has to be in front of the moon, right?
I definitely don't believe that the moon is translucent. I think we have such good cameras and telescopes these days that we can very clearly see that it isn't translucent. It's our closest.
Yeah, I don't believe that. I think it is a solid light, just like the Bible says, its own independent light. So, yeah, it's so that's why I've come to believe that the it's gas, a layer of blue gas in front of the moon, which makes it look like it's behind it, but it's not. Like we can't. That's never made sense. Like from the heliocentric point of view, like how can you see blue behind the moon, which is supposed to be a solid object? You know what I mean? So what's the blue in front of it? So like, is the atmosphere just like blue in between the moon and the observer? I mean, I guess that's what it would have to be. I guess that would have to be the explanation.
Now that we're talking about the moon, so do you believe the moon is a disk or is it a sphere?
I don't think it's a sphere. I think it's a light.
You think
Whatever
it's
that
light.
is.
So is it a flat light or is it like a spherical light that lets off light in all directions, even behind it?
You know what's really weird? I think it's an omnidirectional light. I know that some have argued for it to be a spotlight, and
Right.
I'm not really sure about the spotlight theory. I think it's omnidirectional. And to be honest, this part of this question is super difficult to really nail down because you would think, even on a round Earth, you would think at certain angles you could kind of catch a little bit of the angle of the moon and see just like a little bit, a sliver of the moon that we don't normally see if it was a celestial object.
Well,
But
it's
you
always
never.
pointing at us.
Sorry?
It's always pointing at us in the same direction.
Yes, for all of eternity. It's just very strange. You would think you would be able to get some kind of angle on it. So, like, even in the flat model, it's kind of strange. Like, why doesn't it look like it should be kind of like at an angle if it's like just a light? It's like it's always facing you, no matter what. It's like, have you ever played Doom or like those old shooters?
Yes,
I've always thought it's kind of like it's like a 2D object or something, like a barrel in Doom. Like you can spin around that barrel all day. You can just keep spinning around that barrel. It's just the same barrel just facing you. And I feel like the moon and the sun, it's like some weird illusion God has created to like intentionally confuse us.
Really?
It is super confusing, and it just always looks exactly the same. It's pretty bizarre.
You know, that's really funny. I guess, if you believe that God would make it so that everybody basically is going to see this kind of barrel and nobody's seeing the same barrel. They're all seeing their own, what God is showing them as the barrel. And even if they take a photo, I don't know, that doesn't make sense to me at all, that it would be like a barrel in a video game made in the 90s. That graphics technique was I don't think God would use that kind of graphics technique. I think
It's strange,
he doesn't
but
need,
that's how it appears.
yeah, he doesn't need those kind of hardware hacks.
It was good. It was good. It was a good performance boost for the
Yes, absolutely.
the MMO RPG that you created.
But
So-
even we've gone past that, so I'm pretty sure God would be able to get past
I think so.
the barrel.
So have you? I don't know if you want to talk about hell and how digging down. Have you looked into how they dig, like the farthest humanity has ever dug into the earth?
I believe
like-
the Russians did it, right?
Right. Yeah. So that part was interesting too. It's like, we're so good. We're exploring space. We've conquered everything that we have. We barely know what's in our oceans or in our Earth. Like we only have gone down like 8 miles, and I find that to be very unsatisfying. Like you guys could only go down 8 miles, and like you could not. It was impossible. Okay. It's like God designed the Earth to be difficult. It's like he's perfectly designed it so that you cannot, figure out, you can't just dig down and find hell, right? Like
Right.
your drill literally melts. Like you cannot drill down because it's so hot. Just 8 miles down.
Right. So, at least as far as I know, the conventional laws of physics and all of that, they make sense why you cannot drill down that far. It just gets so hot, as you said. So, I'm not really sure that it's a problem in the around Earth. You're right that there is a lot unexplored, just simply because we can't get there. But flat earthers don't really have like a coherent idea of how, at least as far as I know, how deep the disk is. You know what I mean? Like, is it 8 miles? Is it 16, 32? So,
Well, they say it's like 4,000 miles to the core in helio theory, right?
yes, I'm pretty sure that's correct. Yeah.
Pretty close to that. But we've gone down 8 miles. And I feel like that's just so.
But why do you feel like we can go down deeper?
8 miles is nothing. It's just like I feel like we should be doing a lot better than 8 miles.
Yeah, my real question is,
And not that it's like a solid proof. It's just like
Yeah.
Come on, that's all we
I
can do.
definitely understand your feeling that but you know, if it's too hot down there, it's too hot down there, you know. We humans are really great at making engines to heat things up, but we're not good at making, you know, engines to cool things down. An air conditioner does not make it cooler on Earth. It makes it hotter outside and cooler inside. So how are
Right.
you supposed to dissipate all that heat? You know, just pour a bunch of water? But that, you know, I'm pretty sure, you know, there are just some things that we are just not meant to discover. And uh, until I see a reason that we should be able to go more than 8 miles, it makes sense to me that 8 miles is a sensible limit.
So, yeah, I mean, I think we've covered a lot of ground. We talked about the heavens, the
Yeah, I
earth,
think so
and
too. And it's getting, you know, it's pretty deep into the morning there. So I'm going to let you go, but do you just want to plug your game?
yeah, man, that'd be cool. I actually made a game. It's coming out on Steam. It's called, and it's actually kind of a little reference to the flat Earth. It's called Firmament Wars, and you know, maybe it's not necessarily a reference to the flat Earth. It's actually a Bible reference. The firmament is found in the King James Bible, which is supposed to be, according to some interpretations, the impenetrable dome over the Earth. It's a real-time strategy game. Kind of combines elements of risk and civilization. So basically, it's a multiplayer game, and you can battle your friends up to 8 players. It'll be coming out on Steam on August 8th. So it's on 8/8/2018 at 8 p.m. Pacific time. It'll be coming out. So add it to your wish list. Just search Firmament Wars on Steam, and you can check it out and see what you think. And that's about it.
All right, cool. And as I was telling you on Twitter, you know, if you want help with mapping stuff, feel free to ask me. I can probably help
That's
you.
awesome.
Because
We'll add a flat Earth map to the game. What do you think?
sure, I can help you do it. But the software is based on the globe internally.
Oh.
Yeah, it's based on the globe. It's how it works. So anyway, it was great talking to you. You know.
Yeah, it's a great pleasure, man. It was good talking to you, and it was a great pleasure talking to you and hashing this out. And you know,
Yeah.
let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind, and you know, let him come to his own conclusion.
Exactly. Amen. All right.
All right.
See ya.
God
Bye-bye.
bless you. Good night now.
Very good, guys. Thanks so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you now.